Hey everyone, it's me, Simon Wesley again, and today, we're going to be continuing the playthrough of Witch on the Holy Night again. And where we last left off, Aoko tried to kill Soujyuro. However, after Soujyuro saved her life multiple times against an automaton, and after Aoko realized that she never had any real grounds to attack him anyway, but she especially realized that he was never a threat to revealing her as a mage. So she decided no, I'm not gonna kill him. Then Alice dropped in and is like, if you ain't gonna kill him, I will. Alright, but yeah, so that's where we last left off, and I I have not read ahead since last week, and I am very eager to see what happens next. Alright, Night of the Witches 2. Melody stirred an emotion like nostalgia within them. Something once familiar but now lost to this world. They believed, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that it would play for all eternity. From opening stanza to final coda, it was a mysterious siren song, merry yet longing, that heralded a return from dreams to reality. The night shook. A song was spun. Now, their lost paradise was unearthed. Abandoned dreams, forsaken idols, they all responded to the cry of the blue cat. The name of that bell was Diddle Diddle Banquet of the Night. All fables made possible, all marvels made real, by the magecraft of Alice Kuonji, more magical than magic itself. Alice sat perched atop the clock tower like a black bird of ill omen. She smoothed the ruffles of her skirt as if she were preening.
Alice.
There was tension in Aoko's voice as she lifted her head. The calm atmosphere from a moment prior had long since been shooed away by Alice's gaze. Soujyuro searched his hazy memory. He could not clearly make out her face at this distance, but he was sure he had seen her around town a number of times. Where and when eluded him, however, as the tension in the air kept him from connecting all the dots. Aoko readied her guard and took half a step forward, unconsciously. From an objective standpoint, it almost looked as though she were protecting the figure beside her. Alice's silence grew ever heavier. Her eyes, fixed on the ground below her, were devoid of emotion. An indescribable sense of dread and pressure laid claim over the plaza. If he strained his ears, he could make out the faint ringing of a bell echoing in the distance. The rippling sound waves seemed, unbelievably, to be emanating from under the ground. Soujyuro stepped back, trying to stay out of the way. It was as though he had been told to go to hell. It was as though he had been told to go to hell for the crime of asking if the girl was Aoko's friend.
そうね。仲間思いに当てはまるかは微妙だけど、別にあなたの仕事を疑ったわけじゃないわ。それはどうも。どうせならもう少し早くその良くない予感とやらに気づいて。でもま、ご覧の通り自己解決したわ。夜も遅いし、さっさと帰っていいわよアリス。私の仕事っぷりを疑うわけじゃないんでしょ。
Their eyes locked on one another. Alice's stare was uncomfortably cold. Aoko's was bold, daring Alice to air her complaints.
いえ、気が変わったわ。せっかくだし二人で帰りましょう。その方があなたらしいわ。帰りしな、人形の話でも聞かせてちょうだい。らしいって何よ、らしいって。いいから帰れ帰れ、ぐうたらアリス。部屋に閉じこもって役に立たないムクドリでも作ってろっての。
A disappointed sigh escaped Alice's delicate lips. It seemed that the black-clad girl was more astonished than angry.
青子、口にしたくないけど、本気？
Quietly, Alice questioned her roommate of nearly 2 years.
呆れた。二人で秘密を守ると言ったのに、まだ半端にそっち側なの？それとも情でも移った？別に情っていうより私の気分。だいたい方針なんてその場その場で変わるもんでしょ。そっちこそ一度した約束は絶対守るなんて時代遅れなんじゃない？
The proverbial knives were out now. No quarter was given, nor taken. Sadly, their partnership was one of convenience, and had not reached the level of mutual understanding. Their version of friendship was both delicate and unique. When a conflict of opinion arose, each would refuse to budge until the other crumbled. Neither was concerned for the other's plight, and at least for now, that was how they liked it.
そうね。今の暴言はあなたらしいとは思うけど。
Once again, she let out a sigh, even larger than the one before.
言い争いは後にしましょう。そこの彼をいなかったことにするのは。
Finally, she struck straight to the point. As if making to move a chess piece, Alice lifted her slender finger. Even this simple action seemed mysterious to Soujyuro, the same boy who had been hunted by his classmate Aoko and borne witness to an automaton. Aoko's violence and an animated doll. Though perhaps far beyond the realm of logic, both these things were derived from reality. As surprised as he had been, there was no need to think of them as total mysteries. However, the thing appeared out of thin air from a seemingly unrelated gesture. He had no word for it besides mysterious. Soujyuro stood motionless, captivated by the stage performer's magic trick as the girl's single-finger magecraft turned into an attack directed at him. A blue light flew from the side to repel it, annihilating it without a trace. Aoko immediately regretted her reflexive shot.
どういうこと？約束を曲げただけじゃなく、ルールまで破るつもり？
The already chilled midwinter air plunged below freezing. Alice looked calm and collected on the outside, but in reality, she was sometimes even more hot-blooded than Aoko. Kind of hard to believe, but given her general demeanor so far. This was especially true when it concerned her familiars. Accidentally breaking one would often result in a week of silent treatment. But against someone who maliciously destroyed her things, Alice was prone to retaliate without warning.
あっちゃー、いつかやるとは思ったけど、 ついに激鱗に触れちゃったか。
Aoko sighed at herself. Even she was exasperated by her own stupidity, yet she couldn't help but feel a pang of relief. She did not intend to make any excuses, and she had no regrets. If she had broken the rules, then so had Alice.
Aoko. なんていうか。
If anything, this took a load off her mind. After all, now there was no going back. Aoko never intended to break her own rules. If there was anything for Aoko to regret, it was putting too little power into her shot.
私的に今夜こいつに死なれるのは困るのよ。なんで日を改めて殺しに来てくれないアリス。
To Aoko, it was simply natural to take on a pro bono case in defense of an innocent suspect.
それは市場。悪い？一宿一般の恩義って割と大事にしてるの、私。私との協定より。ええ、時と場合によっては。
Soujyuro's human rights had not yet entered the argument. The girls were busy pouring oil on each other's flames. The girl clad in black was the first to move, or rather, to erupt.
よくわかったわ、アオコ。私は彼をここで殺す。あなたは彼をここだけ生かす。つまり私と戦うということでいい？そんなのいいわけないじゃない。
Aoko bit back the retort. She was very familiar with Alice's magecraft, and knew painfully well how many mystics were hidden in Alice's tiny body. What? Like magic circuit? Wait, is she referring to like magic circuits when she or is it referring to like, I wonder if it's referring to magic circuits when it says mystics. But well, we've already seen that Alice is surprisingly powerful. So I'm just gonna assume that's along the lines of what it's referring to. The odds of victory were essentially non-existent. And once the first shot had been fired, Alice Kuoji was without mercy. Whether facing a roommate or a friend, a most beloved family member or a stranger, once Alice began to fight as a witch, she became a heartless, unflappable monster. Aoko advanced another half-step forward as if to encourage herself. It was too late to back down now. The situation was no longer a trivial quarrel over a witness. The bedrock of their so-called friendship had nothing to do with their individual abilities and everything to do with being equals in will. That is why, in order to stay true to herself, Aoko had no room for compromise or deception.
もちろん、あんたを殺すことになっても、そこのバカは生かしきるわ。それに。
Magic circuits howled as they kicked into gear. Her body, which had mostly been dormant during the battle with the puppet, ignited, preparing to demonstrate its true worth.
それに、どの道最後には殺し合う仲でしょ、私たち。
Her courage overpowered any fear she had for her opponent. Tuning her body, her magic circuits to become like the barrel of a gun, Aoko fired a magic bullet. It was an exceedingly basic magecraft formula. There was no nature interference, no creating of wind, parting of water, nor hastening of decay. It was simply the process of converting the imaginary activity known as magical energy into something real, before releasing it as heat. Oh, so it's kind of like a plasma blast. Huh. Oh wait, if it's releasing it as heat... Actually, yeah, I think that would make it technically count as like a plasma blast. Except with, well, magical properties instead of purely getting hit by ionized gas. Or by superheated ionized gas. Thus, Aoko's destructive power was equal to her supply of magical energy. The magic bullets she had used against Soujyuro were among the most basic single-action magecraft that did not require an incantation. At her present ability, Aoko's main mode of attack, her magic bullet, could be fired at three levels of power. These were at the second level. This required a double-action magecraft, a casting through activation of her crest combined with a simplified incantation. However, without blinking, Alice dispersed the shot that Aoko had mustered all of her spirit to fire. Well, in fairness, to be fair to Aoko here, she had been fighting all night. Aoko tutted in frustration. A swift sneak attack that used a simplified incantation would not be enough to break Alice's guard. Aoko provoked Alice in order to disguise her own lack of composure. Somehow, Alice seemed delighted by Aoko's bravado. Them's fighting words, Aoko.
勢いだけのきっかけは初めてだけど驚いたわ。こんなくだらない理由でもその気になるものなのね、人間って。
Alice giggled. Smiling with heartfelt amazement, Alice gestured her left hand toward the earth. Stab, 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 stab. Countless utensils shot out from underneath the cobblestones paving the plaza. She grabbed his hand as she shouted, jumping backward before he even had a chance to respond. As if they had wills of their own, the utensils that had suddenly appeared from the ground gave chase. As the barrier of spears grew around them, Aoko and Soujyuro put some distance between themselves and the clock tower. Just under 30 feet stood between them and Alice. The lethal weapons that had crumbled the stone beneath them fell short of what Aoko had anticipated. They now encircled the clock tower, making the scene look like the burning of a witch at the stake. The path behind them was safe. If they wanted, they could try to make a break for the main gate and escape. If she could just make it back to town, it would be Aoko's win. All she wanted to do was let Soujyuro get away for the night, so if she could get him back to the city, it would be, for the most part, mission accomplished. What's that? Or so she had thought. Without even offering a glance at her targets below, Alice carefully and lovingly pulled out a bottle from her pocket. Oh, okay, what is Alice about to throw at him? Her shot was deflected with ease. Gone was Aoko's earlier bravado. It was only natural. Aoko had indeed grown as a mage. Over the last 2 years of study, her studies had progressed well, and she'd more or less gotten a grasp on her roommate's tendencies and abilities. This had made her conceited enough to believe that, under favorable circumstances, she'd be able to show Alice a thing or two in a fight. Alice uncorked the magical bottle. A gentle breeze caressed her cheek. Diddle Diddle fled as a new player stepped onto the stage. But from where would it enter? The sound of footsteps, nostalgic parade approached. What is she summoning? And why is the entire park lit up now? emerged was a miracle that Aoko, Alzaki, an apprentice mage, had never witnessed. The dead came to life. The inanimate awakened. The woods were enveloped by the mists. Fire-breathing lizards lurked in the swamps. Puppets made merry at midnight. Alice Kuonji's slender fingers had transfigured the entirety of the park as if gently stroking the back of an elderly cat.
いいわ。ごっこ遊びをしましょう。青子。
One night, the wasteland of dashed hopes and dreams was restored to its former glory. It was an immortal monster ready to devour reality. This and the kind of... hang on. I can't look at CGs here. This and the red tinted one from earlier. Okay, surprisingly effective way on how to make someone as diminutive as Alice actually look intimidating. A dark fairy tale that, once unleashed, would never let its prey escape. Her declaration marked the start of a desperate battle. The witch in black laughed at her friend, her musical mirth filled with affection. Her musical mirth filled with affection, sadness, and innocent delight. Faded glory returned to Kitsy Land. The neon glow of innumerable lights illuminated the night. Speakers filled the air with the sound of vinyl music. Merry-go-rounds, small and large, whirled round and round. All in all, it made for a mind-bending spectacle. It was certainly possible to power the facilities by transmuting magical energy into electricity via alchemy. That said, simply supplying the park with electricity would not have brought back to life that which was broken. The young woman did this not by mixing chemicals into a compound, but by melting down divine providence into a witch's brew. What?
まずいわね。アリスのプロイは何個か見てきたけど、今回のは桁が違う。セット。
Stifling her anxiety, Aoko fired up the crest on her right arm. If magic circuits were a mage's engine, then their crest was software that assisted their magecraft. The fledgling mage Aoko, this was her trump card. Okay, so magic circuits equal engine, crest equal ignition switch. Got it. All she had to do was supply magical energy to her crest-based formula. It may not have been the strongest magecraft, but it was hers. Proof that she was the successor of the Alzaki lineage.
講師2層直流数も
The pattern of her crest shifted to execute the formula, which then connected to her magic circuits. The process resembled trains changing rails, a puzzle involving dozens of circuits. She constructed it as swiftly as possible without sacrificing the quality of the construction. Instant magecraft cast without an incantation would not be enough to reach Alice Konji. Aoko had gauged the strength of Alice's defenses with her initial shots. She would dial up the power 5 times the next time, driving 20 tons of force into her target. Alice had the protection of the thick, hanging fog and the dense barrier around her. However, this attack would be more than enough to pierce through both. Are you sure about that? Are you sure about that, Aoko? Also, this is reinforcing my belief that witches are completely insane. Yeah, don't mess with magic, kids. It probably won't end well with you. Or for you. If Aoko struck home, it could cave in Alice's chest and end the fight. At worst, it would at least knock Alice down from her position atop the clock tower.
そろそろいいかな?
As always, there was one guy who spoiled the deadly tension, pulling Aoko out of killer mode. Soujyuro had been looking back and forth between Aoko and Alice in confusion.
それでどういう話になったんだ?
He said it like he might ask for directions to the train station. And I love how Aoko's expression just changed in the foreground. Normally, she would have lashed out in response, but his deadly serious tone shocked rather than angered her. You know, sometimes everyone, I'm pretty sure everyone at some point in their life has asked themselves the question, is this my life right now? Is this truly how things have wound up? I feel like I constantly ask myself that same question. Aoko swallowed back a sigh and returned her focus to activating her crest.
交渉は決裂。ちょっと怒らせすぎた。あの子から見れば、まあいい機会だし、遊園地ごと私を亡き者にしようって腹ね。
Soujyuro tilted his head as if begging for a simpler explanation.
私、割とあの子に恨まれてるから。捕まった。要するに、あんたも私もあの子をどうにかしないと生きて帰れないってことよ。
そんなとばっちりだ。
まあ、そういうことになるかもね。
As Soujyuro protested in a tone wholly inappropriate to the situation, Aoko let another blast rip from her right arm. She was not aiming at Soujyuro, though. A little earlier in the day, and Aoko would have been happy to do exactly that, but now her attention was focused on the girl in black atop the clock tower. Oh, crap! Aoko's mind struggled to catch up to her astonishment. She had fired the strongest, fastest magic bullet she had the ability to conjure, and Alice blocked it. That much was to be expected. When Alice set her mind to defending herself, such an attack was child's play. What just happened? Something Aoko had never seen before leapt to Alice's defense. A team of horses? Like locusts? No, those existed in the real world, unlike what Aoko had just witnessed. Normal creatures could not form like a spontaneous cloud of fog and then dissipate just as quickly into the night sky. I don't know, have you ever gone dove hunting before? Or have you ever gone bird hunting before? Those suckers are real fast. Impossible things moved in impossible ways. Alice was not even supplying them with any power source. Those things never needed power in the first place. Those broken and discarded things did not follow the rules of mankind. What the... This was an invasion of fairy tales. Compared to them, the automaton looked merciful. Autonomous puppets were products of magecraft, but even then, they behaved as puppets should. These newly animated things, however, were nothing of the sort. Empty vessels became living creatures, dummies warped into malformed beings. There was a fog so dense with magical energy, it visibly spread to all corners of the park, bringing with it a monstrous welcoming party that easily out... Hey, Dumbo! Wait, can I say Dumbo? Or will Disney strike me dead where I stand? Oh wait, it's legally distinct Dumbo. Pig Dumbo. Pumbo. Pumbo. I have a, I have the worst sense. I have an absolutely abysmal sense of humor, bringing with it a more monstrous welcome party that easily numbered over 1,000. Spurred on by the shuddering sensation running down her spine, Aoko fired a barrage of single-action magic bullets. Her impulsive attack scattered futilely. The knights of the merry-go-round soared into the sky. Green, fire-breathing lizards flocked. Bakeries opened their doors once again, and human-sized loaves of fresh bread marched from their ovens. Platoons of newly baked soldiers. Aoko and Soujyuro were completely surrounded. Ferris wheel creaked as it gently turned. A rickety train car raced about the roller coaster tracks with Kitsy, tears streaming down its face aboard. It was a grossly twisted fantasy. Girl Black reigned over the insanity-fueled park. Oh, now we're screwed. Aoko was transfixed by the scene unfolding around her. Then she realized what was happening. Alice had once told her of Meister's familiars. Among them were 3 of particular notoriety, one of which she recalled being capable of something similar to this. And it was called... Struck by Aoko's bullets, the creature exploded into splinters. It was clear Aoko's shots were becoming more powerful, but it was also the case that these beings were less robust than your average autonoma. Aoko turned away from the clock tower, grabbed his hand, and began to run. She shouted as though trying to persuade herself as she valiantly cleared a path. Aoko's magic bullets flew like a scream. Blowing away the creatures that blocked her, simply gathered around their path. She made a hole for them to escape through. Pretty sure she's running low on ammo. Magical bullets Magical bullets exploded like blue fireworks. Aoko and Soujyuro ran down the bumpy brick road. Their bond forged in the heat of battle went far beyond mutual convenience. They headed for the park's exit at full speed without exchanging a word or a look. The weirdness only extended as far as the park border, so they would be safe as long as they made it outside. But, speaking in pure numbers, the difference in strength was 2 versus an army, or rather 1 versus an army. Soujyuro was hardly useful in this situation, and manpower wasn't really the issue here since they were facing puppets. Aoko shouted as she blasted away the monsters that stood in their path. There was no time to stop for breath or even to look back. Soujyuro pursued. His voice too had naturally become shrill. 5 minutes earlier, they had broken out of the siege at the plaza surprisingly fast. It seemed that the residents' awakening differed case by case, with larger creatures taking additional time. Aoko joked as she mowed down the small fry that popped up. But then, that morning, something outrageous extended its way down from above them. It was the claws of the 60-foot... It was the claws of the 60-foot lobster adorning the roof of a seafood restaurant. Its pincers were like a guillotine, as Aoko and Soujyuro cut across the front of the restaurant. The Red King pressed in at tremendous speed, keen on splitting them each in two. Okay, yeah, that would be absolutely horrifying to go up against a giant lobster. The gate was just on the other side of the restaurant, but they had to take the long way around in order to lose the giant lobster snapping at their heels. Literally. Waiting along their detour had been a horde of monsters, too many to count. Soujyuro called out in response, recalling just how narrowly he had avoided his head being severed clean from his body. Wait, I just realized that those are bread men. Yeah, this is really good. I like it. Aoko halted her sprint, set her crest in full operation. Sliding along the brick path, she brandished her right arm. She loosed a shower of magic bullets. Snap was a single-action spell that favored rate of fire over power, and it mowed down the monsters with satisfying pops. Blue explosions bloomed along the lamplit promenade. Blue explosions bloomed along the lamplit promenade. Aoko's curtain of fire fanned out. It was a marvelous start mine fireworks show. The toy breadman turned to charcoal. With a magical barrage that would leave an average spellcaster blue in the face, the novice mage broke through the siege. Meanwhile, a single bird keenly watched everything unfold. Chirp, cheep, 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 chirp. The moment the blue bird descended into its master's field of vision, it made its high-pitched call. The girl listened expressionlessly to the report. The robin flapped its wings as it tweeted in response. Perhaps it was criticizing Alice for complimenting Aoko, or perhaps it was jealous of Aoko for being praised by Alice. Alice could barely make sense of its chirping rant. Aoko Ozaki was a novice mage. Until just 2 years ago, she had grown up with no background in magecraft. Compared to Alice, who was raised as a witch from birth, Aoko possessed far less talent and experience. There was simply no comparison to be made. In a contest of skills in magecraft, 10 times out of 10, Alice would be declared the victor. However, that narrative changed when it came to a battle for life or death. Alice Kuonji was not the type of mage suited to combat, while Aoko Ozaki, on the other hand, was built for it. In a contest that pitted magical energy against magical energy, even Alice would concede that Aoko had the upper hand. Aoko's manipulation of magical energy was extraordinary. The scale of her magic circuits was smaller than that of Alice, but their rotational speed, durability, and output quality, not to mention efficiency, were otherworldly. That was Aoko Elzaki's hallmark. Though she had many failings when handling sophisticated formula, in just 2 years of practice, Aoko had surpassed Alice in simple formula that merely required an energy input. She also had a genius's instincts and adaptability. Though Aoko was not particularly proficient at executing magecraft, she was terrifyingly fast. If she had been born outside the Aozaki clan, she would have doubtless risen to fame as a competitive sharpshooter.
でも
In a straight shootout, Alice did not stand a chance. Alice Kuonji had never bothered to learn primitive magecraft like magic bullets in the first place. She was the classic puppeteer. Her familiars served as her arms and legs to carry out all of the particulars of the battle.
制限時間には気づいているわよね、青。魔力はいくらでも貸してあげるけど、あなたの魔弾はあと半時で値崩れ。
Chirping as if in agreement, the robin took flight. It had been nearly 10 minutes since Alice had made the amusement park into her dominion. To what would the green fog give birth next? Aoko and Soujyuro, still running about, would soon come to understand the gravity of their situation. I'm predicting that the gate is blocked off.
しずきくん、正門ってこっち？
ああ、その店を曲がれば出口だ。
Running non-stop at full speed had them at their limits. The breath ragged, the duo rounded a corner at a breakneck pace. Amusement park though it was, this was still the infamous Kitsy Land. It would have taken a high school student 20 minutes to sprint the entire circumference of the park. And though they were now intimately familiar with the park's geography, it was changing beyond recognition. Welcome to lesson 1 of non-Euclidean geometry. The transformation was not limited to the park's residents either.
何を？
言いたくないんだけど、この遊園地広くなってないか。
It was. The problem wasn't as mundane as mistaking the location of the exits and run strange terrain. Sorry, I had to drink some water. No, the park was warping and twisting in upon itself. Even as they ran, its structure was expanding and growing like that of a living creature. Soon, the pair noticed that the mob encircling them had grown even stronger. Entrusting her back to Soujyuro, Aoko summoned all of her effort just to keep from whining. No one would blame Soujyuro for cowering in shock, but for Aoko to do the same? She bore responsibility for causing and then dragging him into this mess. She could not afford to succumb to panic.
大丈夫。落ち着け私。遊園地の果てはある。遠いけど、鉄柵はちゃんと見える。フラットスナークだって制限なしってわけじゃない。外に逃げるって選択は正しいはず。現状、外までの目算で1キロぐらいだけど。
Up until now, they had been too concerned with simply running. Their breathing had become labored. If they had to run another mile without rest, they'd end up collapsing along the way.
体大丈夫か？
The whisper from behind pulled Aoko back to reality.
大丈夫だけど、ちょっと一息入れたいわね。
賛成。ここから休みなしで外周まで走るのはやめ。
驚いた。しずきくんも外まで走ろう派とは。
She let slip a giggle. Far from debilitated by panic, her comrade in arms had been analyzing the situation and forming an escape plan.
ちょっとだけ建物に逃げ込むのは。
気は進まないけど、それしかないわね。
Disadvantages of that, you will be trapped if they find you and block off the exits. Advantages of that, target-rich environment, and it narrows down possible corridors for the enemy to enter, and it can and the enemy would have to find you first. The Breadmen had them completely surrounded. Perhaps this might have been a problem for an average person, but for Aoko, breaking through the formation to get to the building would be a cinch. The issue was... She considered the characteristics of the transforming park. What would pose danger and what was safe. The most important factor was not the strength nor the complexity of the building. After routing the monsters, Aoko hopped behind the counter, soon followed by Soujyuro. Like she was in a western shootout, Aoko squared off against the monsters using the counter as cover. After assessing the current state of the enemy, Aoko sat down under the counter. Wait. Aoko gave the perplexed Soujyuro a grin and took a moment to catch her breath. She heaved a heavy sigh of relief and fatigue.
ここは遊園地の中でも遊びのない場所だから、あいつらにとっては鬼門なのよ。レジスターも調理器具も最近のものだし、擬人化されたマスコットもないし、スナーク化するにはちょい文明犬すぎるってこと。
スナーク？
あいつらの名前よ。つけたのは私じゃなくてアリスなのかしらね。あの子の性格的にちょっと想像できないけど。
Yeah, snark, just like what Aoko constantly throws around. Perhaps no ease from knowing they were safe, Soujyuro seemed enthralled in her explanation. Aoko could not help but chuckle as Soujyuro nodded sagely. He was certain that he had no idea what she was talking about. Normally this would have irritated her. This time she was grateful for the warmth of his strange sobriety.
それはともかく調子良さそうだな、青崎。
Mistaking her smile for composure, Soujyuro broke into a smile himself. It was just another link in a chain of misunderstandings, but there was no need to redress it.
あなたから見てもわかる？私のマダンの威力が上がっているの。
そりゃ、ミラーハウスで散々追いかけ回されたからな。あの時と同じ動作なのに物騒さが増していれば嫌でもわかる。でもいいのか？確か数に限りがあるとか言ってただろう。もう随分撃っちまったけど、20、30じゃ効かないぞ。
あんた、時々あれよね。
ん？
Her opinion of him improved just a little bit.
なんでもない。私のマダンの威力が上がっているのは単純に魔力の濃度の問題。さっきから霧がかかってるでしょ？
Oh, okay.
全部魔力なのよ。
Okay,
弾を撃つための燃料と思って。
Okay, I do like that it actually addresses how she's able to keep firing. I do like that. And it's a pretty sensible explanation. It's not too far of a not too far of a reach for it's not too far of a reach for someone like her to just pick up the radiant magic energy instead of having to use her own reserves. Magical energy was divided into two broad categories. First was ode, produced within a mage's body. Second was mana, which filled the atmosphere. At the moment, the amusement park had turned into a fairy tale land, overflowing with mana. Although it meant nothing to the average person, to a mage it was paradise where spells could be cast as much as one pleased.
じゃあ残り魔力とやらは気にしなくていいのか。注意すべきは怪我と体力。
まあ、個人的な責任においてはその限りね。
Soujyuro breathed a sigh of relief. From Soujyuro's perspective, more so than the monsters she mowed down, Aoko was the biggest bully on the playground. He'd been concerned about what would happen should her magical energy be exhausted, but luckily for him, she was far from surrendering her crown.
頼りにしてくれるのは嬉しいけど、ぬか喜びよ。あんな雑魚たち、ただスナーク本体は当然として、アリスが他の童話の怪物を出してきたら、私じゃどうにも。
他の童話の怪物。遊園地をこんな風に変えたや。
そう。プロイキッシャーって名付けられた。私たちでさえ目を背けたくなる不可能な夢物語をも再現する時代に取り残されたデタラメよ。
Well, I guess that explains why how it managed to revive the park. Soujyuro's expression seemed to be calling her out on the hypocrisy.
あのね、そう。プロイキシ不可能な。あのね、私たちはちゃんと現代に寄り添った魔術師よ。できないこともあるし、当たり前のことだけど、近代兵器にはかなわない。20世紀、まあいろんな戦争の後押しで兵器の進化は私たちを。けど、あの子のは違う。どんなに人間の技術が進歩しようと関係ないって怪物なの。例えば、あのブレッドマンいるでしょ。あいつには自動拳銃とか効かないわよ。多分、意味が分かっていないから。
Huh. Aoko casually gestured outside past the counter.
アリスの使い魔は全てが空想によってこねられた神秘なの。前提からしてありえないことだから、通常の物理法則と折り合いが悪い。空想と現実は両立しないっていうごく当たり前の理由でね。
なるほど。ブレッドマンってのは。
Soujyuro seemed to have ignored the majority of Aoko's explanation and only reacted to the part that caught his curiosity.
話を戻すけど、あいつらと近代兵器の相性は最悪。ロケット弾でも効果はないわ。意思の疎通。
So because they're impossible in the first place, they just ignore all normal damage?
プロイキッシャーにとって彼らの世界には存在しないもの、意味がわからないものは触れることなく無産する。
Huh, that's actually pretty
彼らに通じる
interesting.
のは同じ神秘を帯びた魔力だけっていうデタラメぶりよ。もう完全に概念空間っていうか。要するに、あいつらは伝承防御っていう特別なルールを持っていて、単純に強い力、強い魔術じゃ効果は薄いの。元になった童話にちなんだ欠点をつかないと倒せない。ギリシャ神話のアキレスあたり分かりやすい例えなんだけど。
Oh yeah, like okay, so it either has to be just as nonsensical as they are, or something they recognize, or if it's based off a specific story, you have to target a specific weakness of that. Like, well, with the example of Achilles here, because his mother had dipped him in the river Styx when he was a baby, it was completely impossible to pierce his skin or injure him on every part of his body except for his heel, because that's where his mother had held him up from when dipping him in the river Styx. So, I believe it's in the... I believe the story is recorded in the Iliad. But in the original story, in the stories about Achilles, what caused his death during the Trojan War was that someone exploited his weakness by using a poisoned arrow and striking his heel. The poison wound up killing him. So this is actually, I mean, it's a little wordy. It's all of these explanations are a bit wordy, but I am following. Soujyuro shook his head.
そう。無事帰れたら飛び丸あたりに教えてもらって。定番だけどいい話よ。
I mean, to be fair, Aoko was the original story was from like 2,500 years ago. So technically speaking, it's not cliche. Everything after that is a little cliche. Soujyuro was feeling pretty lost, but he did his best to grasp the situation. He thought that Ploy kickshaws were scary enough to chase Aoko and that public from before or out of the house barefoot. Certainly, the scene before them was the stuff of nightmares. But Soujyuro had a different way of thinking.
やっぱり青崎の方が怖くないか。
あんた死ぬの？
Again, I love Aoko's facial expressions. Do you want to die? Soujyuro waved in protest, silently pointing out that she had made his case for him.
あのね、今私アリスにとってあのブレッドマンもロブスターもソーセージ屋のミンチマシーンも全部が全部私が撃ってるマダンより価値がない。いい？あの
呼吸ってこれが？
Okay, so all of this is
私だって考えた。でもそ
all
れ
of
が
this
現
is
状。
just the
たった一体の童話の怪物だけで私たちは手一杯。
oh, okay, so the actual monster is what's causing all this. So the only way, so what they need to, so one possible way out is to locate the monster, or is to figure out what creature this thing, or what legend this thing's taking the form of, and exploit that
そういうわけだ
thing's
から、
weakness.
アリスがあと一体でも追加したら諦めて。
So if it's like the wolf from Little Red Riding Hood, hack it to pieces with an axe, I guess.
追加ってこれに
あの子が出し惜しみしなければまだ何体かストックはあるでしょうけど、まあ成立する条件はあるわね。例えば川がないと目を覚まさない怪物もいる。この遊園地噴水はあるけど川はないでしょ。
童話ってかけそばとか。
ここに川がないのは不幸中の幸いね。もしあったらもっと直接制圧に向いたやつが出てきてた。
Aoko continued, completely ignoring Soujyuro.
話の続きだけど、アリスの魔術の基本はマザーグース。で、知らないか。イギリスの歌で遊び心に富んだメルヘンチックな内容よ。ただ、そっち系のプロイキッシャーは怖くないの。みんなそれなりになんとか魔術にも落とし込める範囲だから。
聞きたくないんだけど、そっち系じゃないのは。
マザーグースを下地にしたとある創作童話系。あの子のお母さんが好きでね。こっち系のはどいつもこいつも尋常じゃない。で、この遊園地を生き返らせたのはこっち系よ。多分フラットスナークってやつだと思う。私も聞き流していたから詳しくはわからないけど。
Huh. Wait. Is that supposed to be Alice in the reflection? That doesn't... It looks a little different from her. Soujyuro swallowed the discomfort making its way up his throat. He really wanted her to explain things a little less vaguely, but something she had just said necessitated further investigation.
待て青崎、あの子の話を聞き流したって。
いや、説明してもらったのは随分と前だし、あの頃はアリスの話あんまり信じられなかったのよね。私が素人だと思って大げさに自分の魔術を語ってくれてるな、舐められてるなとか。
In truth, if anyone hadn't taken the lesson seriously, it was Aoko. She would learn that lesson firsthand soon enough when she experienced just how real Alice's monsters were. She'd also discover how heretical the monster witches truly were in the world of magecraft.
その聞き流した内容は
何でも強力な結界を張るプロイだった。アリスが受け継いだプロイは山ほどあるけど、捨てられたもの、忘れられたものを童話的に蘇らせるやつで、今まで誰も破ったことが、それでついたあだ名が触れられぬもの。
フラットスナークじゃないのか？
それもあだ名。とにかく正体がわからないやつばっかりなんで、一つのフラットスナークはその中でも正体不明さはトップランクのデタラメぶりよ。あなたルイス・キャロルのスナーク狩りって本知ってる？
いや、そもそもルイス・キャロルというの
は。
は
Aoko, I think you forget that he was from a rural or an almost uncontacted mountain village. Of course, he wouldn't know who Lewis Carroll was. But I do. But I do. Author of Alice in Wonderland, and he also wrote the Jabberwocky. Now, technically, the title of the first is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. That's just, honestly, that's just being pedantic.
そっからか。ドジスン教授はそうね、特殊性癖を持った妄想し、今重要なのは彼が残した著作の方。スナーク狩りはね、スナークって呼ばれる正体不明の怪物を捕まえようと奔走する冒険家たちの話なの。キャロルらしい皮肉ばっちり、支離滅裂、意味不明、結末不在の本当に困った本で、一行は島で苦しみつつ最終的にはスナークを見つけるものの、見つけたベイカーは唐突よくわからないもの探しに奔走する人間の風刺なんだけど、この遊園地において誰がベイカーで。
Aoko elected not to share this, but Flat Snark had other popular names as well. The Enigmatic Island, the Five-Dimensional Plane. These names were not given to it by Alice, but rather muttered by mages whom the Mindsters defeated. In mathematics, snark is a term used in graph theory to refer to contradictory and impossible planar graphs. A plane proven to be unable to exist in this world was given the name apt for an ill-fated existence paradoxical in nature. The fairy tale monster scribe, this name is said to hold no form discoverable by man. Aoko also declined to mention something else. Flat Snark was a fairy tale monster that could grow. It would hide somewhere in the amusement park, continuously exhaling magical energy until the park completely transformed into a fantasy land.
脅かしてもしょうがないし。
Well, it's not like there's any point scaring him.
何か言ったか？
別に。簡単に言って童話世界の再生がフラットスナークの力なの。この遊園地との相性は抜群でしょうね。何しろ元々が童話を元にした遊び場だから。
If this had been a business district, for example, Flat Snark would have posed far less of a threat. At most, its power would be limited to projecting the shadow of a dinosaur onto a building's window panes.
あ、だからここは安全だって。
Soujyuro realized that something was wrong when he noticed a glutinous liquid dripping onto his back. He looked up to the ceiling. Their eyes met. Before he had a chance to think, Soujyuro hopped up from the floor. Taking the initiative, he jumped out from behind the counter. Trying to stop him from committing an act of suicide, she also came to her feet. Immediately, she noticed something coming to life overhead. The gargantuan mouth clamped shut. With no mascot to speak of, the burger joint itself began to transform into one giant monster.
もうなんで天井にピエロの絵なんて描いてんのよ、あの店。普通もっと違うところに労力割かない？そんなにピエロが好きなら入り口にでも飾っとけ。
I mean, that is a very legitimate complaint. Plus, who likes clowns anyway? I hate clowns. I don't like clowns. They're creepy. Aoko aired out her grievances as she ran. There was no safe haven left. Moment by moment, the last remnants of civilization were being eroded away by fairy tales. Uh-oh. The amusement park had reached the final stage of snarkification. It was not just the mascot characters that had been granted life. Like the burger joint, even the buildings had begun to transform. The roller coaster that made its way about the park writhed and twisted like a Chinese dragon. And now it was a Chinese dragon. Aoko and Soujyuro stared up, dumbfounded by the Ferris wheel, which had grown to over 250 feet in height. Hordes of breadmen closed in on them as if to offer tickets. Mobs of trinkets, actual kickshaws, rampaged the park. Whenever a hole was punched in the envelope, whenever a hole was punched in the envelopment, it was instantly filled. It was a battle of attrition with no end in sight. But that was a matter of course, as there were a few fairy tales about limited resources.
なんかどうしようもないぞ。
スナーク本体を探して。童話の怪物には本体に当たる器物があるの。それさえ壊せば
本体ってどんな？
さっき言ったでしょ。童話の怪物は現実にないものだって。今までいなかったおかしなやつとか現実じゃありえないもの、それが本体。
おかしなやつって例えば？
だから。
Do I have to spell it out for you?
命のある人形とか空飛ぶゴーカートとか。
Aoko paused her firing for a moment. After saying this out loud, she realized just how deep the grave was dug. The amusement park was a treasure trove of fairy tale-esque creatures on any given day. Who could say what was impossible amidst the newly transfigured knickknacks running around?
そっか、おかしくないやつなんて一つもないんだ。この中に紛れ込んでる。
Hoping that she was wrong, Aoko bit her bottom lip. Flat snark was the type of ploy that deployed bounded fields. Seeing as it was commanding so many familiars, it would not be unusual for its main body to have little or even no defenses. Furthermore, if it was modeled from a story about it being untouchable and unidentifiable, it would be logical to assume that it would collapse in on itself shortly after being discovered.
逆に言えば、見つければ私たちの勝ち。
That's actually pretty reasonable.
そんな脆いやつが雑魚に紛れ込む。木の葉隠すなら森の中って言うけど。
This was closer to the truth than Aoko realized. As long as there was the slightest possibility of it being hit by one of Aoko's stray bullets, it would not dare appear in front of them. Its true form was orchestrating the park from somewhere safe.
でも、どこかに見えているはず。スナークは本の主題だもの。常にページのどこかにいないと主人公の資格がない。
But where? Put very simply, the Ferris wheel was the safest location in the park, as well as a symbol of its past glory. Perhaps... Her eyes opened wide at the sudden suggestion. While Aoko had been trying to come up with a plan to overcome the stalemate, it seemed Soujyuro had been racking his brain as well. His proposal was a simple one. If they could not find the snark, they just needed to take out its master, Alice. Alice had not moved at all from the clock tower. Even from here, they could make out her figure draped in moonlight.
それは一番ダメ。アリスを殺してもフラットスナークは止まらないし、この大体私じゃあの子を殺せないから。よくて半殺しがいいところ。
A bread man, angered at the insults hurled towards its master, moved to attack and was mercilessly burnt to a crisp. The two stood back to back, catching their breath. With no plan to speak of and no route of escape, they had reached rock bottom. Meanwhile, the oddities were forming a circle around their prey, as if they smelled blood in the water. Were they to be dragged into a bakery for the oven? An instant meat grinder at the butcher shop? Skewered and paraded around atop the carousel? Walked the plank of the thorny pirate ship? After 2 years of slumber, they were eager to welcome their new guests.
一応聞いておきたいんだけど。
何？手短にね。今考え事してるから。
ああ、あの連中が何をしたいか嫌っていうほど伝わってくるんだけど。
その疑問、連中の人間嫌いは遊園地の怨念とフラットスナークの性格じゃない。基本的にまともなやついないから。あ、でも。
Aoko was unable to deny that there were some similarities.
それは結構。それで。
期待させて悪いけどお手上げ。あんたが。
それは嫌だ。とりあえず逃げよう。
しずきくん
？She blinked in surprise at the sudden turn of events. Soujyuro, who had until now been meekly following her lead, had grabbed Aoko's hand and pulled her with him into a headlong charge at the swarm of bread in an attempt to break out the encirclement.
意味わかんなすぎ。なんで今の流れでそうなるのよ、あんたは。
Aoko nonetheless followed Soujyuro's uncharacteristically gung-ho lead, cursing him all the while. Alone, he had no chance of breaking through the surrounding wall of enemies with brute force. Aoko regained her bearings and let fly a spray of magic bullets ahead of Soujyuro. They burst through the net and ran as hard as they could. At this point, all that was left to do was what they had planned from the outset: get out of the park. But not before addressing what needed to be addressed. Aoko could not begin to comprehend Soujyuro's reaction.
ミラーハウスの時と今は違うだろう。いいから走れ。
違わないわよ。あんたを殺そうとした私も、あんたを殺したいアリスも。
Though she wondered what was getting her so worked up, Aoko didn't. Aoko did not stop. She told herself that the degree of Soujyuro's stupidity, charging the weapon so recklessly, had caused her to lose her cool.
あのね、一緒に逃げてるぐらいで勘違いしないでくれる？言っとくけど私、明日になったらまたあんたを殺しに行くから。
それはまた今度の話だろう。だいたい青崎に殺されるのならいいけど、あの子に殺されるのは嫌だ。
Mirroring what he said to Aoko regarding the doll.
だからなんで？
だって顔も知らない。話したことさえない相手だ。
Wait, he'd prefer to be killed by someone he's actually spoken to? It was like someone had doused water over her blazing fury. Aoko's anger was snuffed out by the absurd simplicity of his reasoning.
顔も知らないって。
Could it be that Soujyuro did not mind being killed by someone as long as he had met them? Aoko grimaced as she followed him. Yeah, he's a bit of a weird guy. From her spot atop the clock tower, the girl observed the growth of her familiar. Flat Snark, a savior of the discarded. It was a vile, vulgar fairytale monster provided those abandoned by fate with a glimmer of hope before snatching it away. Alice had it under her control, but she was still keen to keep the Snark from expressing its bad habits. After completing a lap around the park that had now reached the size of an entire town, the Robin made the situation report. It seemed Aoko was prioritizing the safety of the boy. Even if it resulted in wasting an entire day, choosing not to capitulate on the decision was very much like her.
青子のことだから時計台ごと私を焼き払いに来るかと思ったけど。
The bluebird cheeked in response. Was it denying its master's portrait of Aoko? Or agreeing that it was Aoko's style to do exactly that? An outsider might interpret its interjections either way.
退屈？
The robin jumped at being addressed so unexpectedly. It chirped and flapped its wings like a flustered servant, frantic to say otherwise.
珍しく気があったわね。いいわ。せっかくのゲームだし。
Calmly, she pulled out a small object from her pocket. It was a dark gray Easter egg, and emanating from inside it was the ticking of a clock. The robin knew would be a ploy kickshaw with a bad attitude for exceeding flat snarks, known to be among the best in one-on-one situations.
いってらっしゃい。たたえる時間は20分に設定したわ。いつも通り。控えめに壊れてきて。
And together with the witch's breath, the egg filled with praise, it disappeared. Suddenly, a strong wind swept through the park. The words, "I could have killed them all by myself," floated through the air. It was the disappointment of something enormous that was visible to all yet overlooked. Aoko and Soujyuro continued their dash toward the boundary separating the park from outside. The curio horde that stood in their way had reduced in number. The iron fence that separated the two from the outside world was just over 300 yards away. Fortunately, there were no particularly large buildings barring their path. If the Ferris wheel had stood in their way, that would have spelled the end, but thankfully it had yet to reach its full strength. The only things that appeared before them were weak oddities that could easily be handled by Aoko's simple magecraft. She would have said make it to the fence if only her lungs would allow it. Since Aoko was utilizing the ample mana filling the park, her tank of magical energy was nearly full. Moreover, the condition of her body's circuits was steadily improving to the extent that she would be able to unleash at least one all-out onslaught. Until something unusual was hovering above her field of vision. It was locked on Soujyuro, hovering 10 feet above him over to one side. Soujyuro had seemingly noticed before Aoko hints his previous awkward glances toward the sky. In truth, it would have been stranger for him not to notice, as the thing was practically glued to him. In terms of its size, the floating object measured about 3 feet in diameter. Tiles covered its exterior, about which a multitude of spinning lights danced about. Soujyuro asked, not really sure what to call it. Her bullets bounced off it like it was made of rubber. That trait, the ability to deflect all outside interference, confirmed to Aoko that this thing was undoubtedly a ploy kickshaw. Aoko picked up her pace as she barked orders. The Eggman, who sat on a wall, he would crack just as the tale spoke of. Nothing anyone could do or say would cause him to fall, but the moment they stopped looking, he would tumble down and break into pieces. Humpty Dumpty. It was the Mother Goose poem, Humpty Dumpty. If Soujyuro was its target, then the moment he averted his gaze, it would tumble and explode. Either way, he was going to scatter something troublesome when it fell. Its oval shape, the keyhole adorning its front, and writing inscribed upon it, they all made her anxious. If it was an egg, that meant it was going to hatch at some point. Even if he continued to stare, once the time came for whatever was inside to come out, they would have even less ability to conserve their energy.
青崎、早すぎないか。あまり全力で走ると。
後のことは考えないで。いいからしずきくんは卵だけに集中して。
At this critical juncture, Breadman stepped out to join the egg and block their path.
邪魔。
The Breadmen were marching forth in a grand battalion. At her level of firepower, Aoko should have easily mowed them down. However...
肩焼きかこの。
If Snap failed to do the job, that meant it was time for her to put her crest to use. Draw. A formula-triggered bullet encased in a full wind jacket. For previous shots were the equivalent of a machine gun volley, then this was her artillery shot. The hard crust bread that it absorbed her snap without a dent, scattered into thousands of tiny pieces at her draw's torrent. Delete. Of course, the destruction did not end with just the Breadmen. What had once been a brick road was now thoroughly stripped of its pavement. The nearby stalls had been warped into twisted steel skeletons. It was a spectacle that made Soujyuro question what the greater obstacle to the escape was, the wall of Breadmen or Aoko's ability to lay waste to things.
ちょっとなんで距離取るのよそこ。そばにいないと危ないじゃない。ほらもっとこっち。言っとくけど、あんたがあいつらに囲まれちゃったらアウトよ。私人質とか意味ないタイプだし、そもそも区別して撃つとかそういうのできないし。
This made a lot of sense to Soujyuro. He had not fully appreciated the part about hostages, but he got the gist of it.
つまり今
あんたね。
Offended though she was by his typical naive response, she could not help but be impressed. Soujyuro was a straight arrow through and through. His eyes stayed firmly focused on the egg overhead, even amidst the chaos of the melee unfolding behind.
その分なら安心か。物分かりは悪いけど、
そんなことより青崎、俺の昨日。
まあね、あいつら少しずつ強くなってきてるわ。大量生産が軌道に乗ったんで、今度はクオリティアップをテーマにしたのかも。しずきくんでもお察しの通り、ここからは手強くなっていく一方よ。あのパンたちでさえ個体差が出てきたみたいだし。考えたくないけど、そのうちジャム塗ったりレタス乗っけたり、果ては合体したりして。
Though she was joking, her eyes were dead serious. Soujyuro shuddered at the thought of the situation growing even more dire.
じゃあそのうちミラーハウスの人形ぐらいに怖くなるのか。
間違いなくね。そこまでレアなパンになったら。
Soujyuro shook his head, a look of complete aversion upon his face.
でしょ？なら急ぎましょう。いろいろ。
Aoko took a quick, deep breath, then began to sprint once again. Far in the distance, through the fog, the iron fence waited, 300 paces away. As long as nothing happened, they would make it there in one piece. Soujyuro followed after Aoko, holding on to that all too convenient hope. But hope was something ever fleeting. In fact, it lasted not even 300 yards. The edge of the amusement park may well have been the edge of the world. Dozens of undulating horizons could be seen, crowding the sky like a giant cloud or a thick curtain, Perhaps groaning lips. It was the end of the road, the outer limit of an outrageous and fantastical realm. And yet, Aoko found it to be much like the last page of an enormous picture book. The sight turned her mind blank. Well, this is about as bad as it gets, she thought. The Snark, this island of despair, had at last brought Aoko to her knees as she stared at the swelling border. The park indeed had an end. Even now, as Aoko and Soujyuro had expected, a fence divided the amusement park from the residential area neighboring it. It had both doubled in height and been made sturdier. Another hurdle she had foreseen before even laying eyes on it. Expecting it to have been snarkified, Aoko had come prepared to demolish an obstacle or two. This construction before her went beyond a mere wall. It was an ocean that separated the underworld from the mortal one. The iron fence was like a restless, surging sea. One or two small walls could easily be toppled. Even 10 or 20 could be dealt with one way or another. Between the power left in her body and that which filled the park, putting on a brave front was within her power. She could fully mobilize her circuits and her crest to the point of burnout in a last-ditch effort, like some reenactment of the parting of the Red Sea. Even if a path could be opened, she would not have the energy left to walk it, and it was obvious what would become of her afterwards. The residents would hardly forgive her for wreaking such havoc around their park. Like ants drawn to honey, they would swarm the helpless girl and tear her to pieces. Despondent and exhausted, she felt the faint sting of remorse. Escaping the park. Looking back on how they had gotten here, Aoko recognized that her choices had been her undoing. Under the golden full moon, beams of steel bent and merged like wireframe sculptures. It was only a matter of time before the amusement park itself became one colossal monster. The horde of familiars gathered in the plaza where Alice was had formed an impenetrable blockade around her. Just above the head of the boy beside her, the whispering egg called Scratch Dumpty continued to shuffle what appeared on its surface.
Aozaki.
Shizuki-kun.
The boy's voice snapped Aoko out of her trance, if only for a moment. The stark reality of the situation quickly dawned on the novice mage. The sheer hopelessness of it all as it ripped out and snatched away any will she had to resist.
ゲートに行こう。ここはどうしようもないけど、入り口ならもうちょっとマシだろ。フラットスナークだっけ？こいつにもルールがあるって言ったじゃないか。なら、これは役割の問題だ。初めから鉄柵は通れない壁だけど、ゲートなら出入り口として機能しているかもしれない。
Soujyuro had not given in to panic. Aoko found herself honestly admiring Sojuro's ability to analyze Snark's characteristics given the circumstances. Now calm, she steeled her resolve.
そうね。確かに門はあると思う。けど、たどり着くのは難しいわ。広場や入り口にはもっと上等なのがたむろしてるだろうし、門だってあの観覧車以上の怪物かもしれない。
青崎はゲートには行かないのか。
まあね。
Aoko took another glance at the undulating iron fences. It was too late to achieve her goal of making it out alive. In that case, she decided to prioritize the other promise she had made.
今からこの鉄柵を壊すから、あなたはそこから外に出て。それで、私の役割はおしまいよ。
Though her words were few, her tone told the whole story. She was telling him to escape by himself.
信じられない。こんなの、青崎。
私だけならね。でも、今はこの遊園地がそれでも一回が限度だから、穴を開けたら、あんたには全力で走り抜けてもらうしか。
She would carve a path through the iron sea of fences, gambling on one final effort, great incantation to launch the biggest projectile she could manage. As an outsider, Soujyuro could not even begin to imagine just how much of a burden this would be for her. All he could imagine was a hazy vision of Aoko being left behind in this park. What would happen to her? Would that girl in black come to save her? Cruel as it was to imagine, he knew she would not. After Aoko had exhausted her very best in order to save him, that girl would not stay her hand. The only way Alice would let Aoko off the hook was if Aoko killed Sojuro's payment. And so...
20メートルぐらい離れてて、準備に手間取るけど、その卵の表面が茹で上がるまでには終わらせるから。
It went without saying that this was the only path.
待ってくれ。俺を逃がすって言うけど。
ないけど。外に出られたけど。これぐらいは最後の意地よ。守るって言ったんだから、できるところまでやらないと。
Surprised by her seemingly moral stance, Soujyuro saw Aoko in a new light. But of course, Soujyuro realized that she was not fighting for his sake, but for the sake of her pride.
そうだったな。けど、それなら俺だけ。
何よ。いいから離れてて。
Aoko eased off just a bit. She recalled how an hour ago he had gotten the better of her.
青崎、まだ意地を張れるんなら、このお化けみたいな鉄柵を壊せるなら、他に壊すべきものがあるはずだ。
ないわよ。悪いけど、私は目に見えるものしか壊せないの。いい？今はフラットスナークなんかより、この壁を壊してあんたを足抜けさせるのが私の。
逃げるのか。
Aoko was just about to turn her back on him when Soujyuro clutched her hand. His words caused something inside of her to boil with rage. It was as though someone had set her heart on fire. The surprise that pricked open her true feelings and the disappointment she felt towards herself thawed her frozen limbs.
誰が逃げるのはそっちで、逃がしてあげるのはこっちだって言うのよ。甘く見ないで。いざとなったら遊園地ごと爆破してみせるわ。
そうか。ならここで俺を逃がすのは無駄だな。その気迫は本命のために取っておこう。それまでは俺も手伝うから。
は？手伝う？それこそ無駄な気遣いよ。頭きた。いいから逃げろバカ。だいたい走り詰めで息も絶え絶えなやつなんか使えないわよ。
そりゃいい加減ヘトヘトだけど、そういう青崎なんか疲れ以上に傷の方が傷んでるだろ。
Not to mention the injury to her back that Aoko had nearly forgotten about. Even now, she couldn't ignore the pain that the automaton had inflicted upon her spine. With iron will, she'd managed to push it out of her mind, mostly.
魔術とか抜きにすれば、まだ俺の方がマシじゃないか。入り口までおぶっていくことぐらいなら、なんとか。
できないことは口にしないで。もういいから言って。慣れているもの、私は。だからいいの。
The fact that they were a team, the fact that she'd still have to kill him after all of this. None of the irony was lost on her as she said these words. It didn't matter anymore. Still, Soujyuro didn't let go of her hand. He gripped it even harder. His expression was the same as ever. Aoko frowned, trying to figure out if he was upset with her.
確かに、こういうのは初めてだ。けど、山じゃ危険な目ぐらい合ってる。鹿に襲われたことだってあ。
As a city girl, she had no idea what it meant to be attacked by a deer, but his determination was apparent enough. True, looking back on it now, he had maintained his composure through it all. A normal person would barely be able to talk through such panic. Perhaps growing up deep in the mountains, far from civilization, had taught him how to stay calm in the face of so much.
だから信じてくれ。少しでいいから。
He spoke his plain, unadulterated feelings and released his hand. There was no lie in him. In fact, he was too honest, so much that she found it hard to believe him. Soujyuro had no reason to go that far. As it stood, Aoko had no future. After confessing this and telling him to escape, why did this boy still offer to help a person like her?
わからない。どうしてそこまでするの？私に付き合えばあなたは死ぬのよ。これが最後だから、ちゃんと考えてよね。あなたはここで逃げるべき。
それはわかるよ。
Soujyuro answered immediately, realizing that Aoko was looking for his reason. This level of insight Soujyuro demanded a round of applause.
そうすると、青崎が死んでしまいそうだ。
His words were as irrational as always.
だから、どうしてそこまでするのよ、あんたは。
Actually, yeah, I'm curious as to why he's going so far for her as well. She did try to murder him like an hour earlier. She was yelling out of frustration. After thinking for a moment, Soujyuro replied. Simple and to the point. His face seemed to ask why she would even question him so. There was a pause, no more than 2 seconds. His surprise attack had stopped Aoko in her tracks. Alice was not the only one who had an ace up her sleeve. That line reached deeper even than Flat Snark could ever hope to. All Aoko could respond with was an expression of pure shock. It was a simple, stubborn reason. The strongest kind on earth. Soujyuro Suzuki was indeed incomprehensible. To be able to work unconditionally with someone who was trying to kill him. But she felt as though she'd finally grasped a sliver of his true nature. Tomimoto and the others' assessment of him was correct, as vexing as it was to her to admit. He laughed at her sour grumbling. At this point, he was used to her insults. Their clash of wills ended here. Aoko's blood ran hot from her blazing heart. If he was going to make a face like that, all she could do was try to think of a way to get them both home. Yeah, Soujyuro may be he's a bit dumb, but he's a bit dumb, but he's incredibly kind-hearted. And that appears to be what is going to prompt Aoko's character development. Though her tone had lightened, there was still hesitation in her eyes. It was only natural. Aoko had not even a clue as to how to begin to fight the Snark. If only she had just been a bit more skilled or trained just a bit more, there might have been some way to look for it. Unconsciously, she let her apprehension show. Sniveling was pointless. She would just have to figure it out by herself, but... Aoko gave him a look as if to ask what that was supposed to mean. Soujyuro also made a face that suggested she should have brought it up sooner. I think so. Well, Soujyuro whispered in her ear quietly so as not to be overheard. It was certainly unexpected, but then again equally obvious after he explained the mistake. She knew right away that he was correct. At last, she had an inkling of Flat Snark's original form. Namely, let's see what it is. They strategized for 10 minutes. After deliberating the Snark's true form and figuring out a plan of attack, the two exchanged nods in acceptance of their roles. Though she jabbed him for his previous failure as a decoy, her voice was bright. Aoko's original vigor had returned to her at Soujyuro's discovery of the truth. Meanwhile, Soujyuro was also getting serious in his own way. He took Aoko's warning to heart. Soujyuro nodded, telling her to leave it to him. Though he made it sound like he was holding a grudge, it seemed to him to be the only way of showing her his resolve. Aoko let out a sigh of defeat. Once more she couldn't figure him out. She wanted to say that she believed in him, but apparently that was too embarrassing for her. Aoko turned away from Soujyuro and began to run. she had begun to think that maybe this change of pace was not so bad after all. And so ended the intermission. Young cast members were handed their new lines. Whatever happened next, the Night of Witches had at long last entered its climax. Wait, is there a third part to this? Oh, wait, no. They split up? You sure? She was filled with foreboding at the Robbins report. Apparently, they had gone in opposite directions. The park's resident. Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. I'll be back in a moment. Hello, and I am back. And I have an apple right now, so I might mute the mic every now and then to take a bite out of it. Actually, yeah, I don't think I don't know if I've eaten enough today. I mean, I had pretty decent sized lunch and Chinese food for dinner, but I also went running earlier and I've been increasing physical activity a lot more, so well, it wouldn't hurt to have an apple. Okay. The park's residents had set off after the boy witness, and it would take them mere minutes to capture him, so the bird said.
どういうこと？追いかけているのは本当に彼？青子が変装しているのではなく。
The robin flapped its wings, chirping away any doubt. It had seen them with its own two eyes. Aoko was heading for the plaza, while a cocky brat was making a run for the roller coaster.
青子が彼を見捨てたですって。そんな簡単なことならいいけど、ダンプティは彼に張り付いているの
？The robin nodded enthusiastically. It didn't know about the other birds, but with its superior night vision, it seen that sucker clearly because he had moved to a high point.
ダンプティはなんて？最後まで歌わせろ。こんな褒め殺したい間抜けはまたとない。ですって。
Scratchy Dumpty was a ticking time bomb that would drop and detonate the moment its target averted its gaze. That is, as long as his target continued to observe him. In a way, that was a gentlemanly ploy. In a way, he was a gentlemanly ploy kickshaw, though Alice wished he would forego such niceties when in battle.
そうね。視線を切らないだけでは、ダンプティからは逃げられない。表面の死が完成すれば扉が開く。彼がどこまで逃げようと、あと少しでダンプティがしまってくれるわ。
Until the park, or rather the snark, was destroyed, Soujyuro would not be able to escape. Which meant the larger concern was Aoko. Aoko had promised to protect the boy, which begged the question, where was she running to?
ここにいる限り、青子の動向はつかめない。
Wait. Huh. Alice looked out over the park, ignoring the robin's attempts to get her attention with its plumage. Flat Snark had nearly reached its full size. He was a different breed of beast compared to the other cheap ploys. To her, it was one of her three most irreplaceable and precious familiars.
そうね。任せたわスナーク。青子が諦めない以上、あなたも手は抜かないで。
Alice remained where she was, with the same historical merit as the troll under the bridge and the poison-clawed reptile. Flat Snark was one of Alice's ultimate ploys. She was placing her trust in its reputation and ability. All
でも
right.
忘れないで。これはゲームよ。勝敗がついたのなら、私のところに帰ってきて。
Love to say it to you, Alice, but it's not making it out of this. The drifting fog ignored its master's words. It was the one thing that Alice had misread. Flat Snark was a king, even among the other ploys of terrible, vulgar antics. Death to the defeated, gruesome tragedy to the vanquished. It found no pleasure unless it brought about dramatic ruination of life and wealth. The fog billowed like a wicked laughter. After all, only a king had the right to decide the fate of the vanquished, and the Snark's greed could not be contained. Thus, it hadn't even the slightest intent to play fair, despite its master's orders. Wow! Over 100 feet high. One careful step at a time, the figure made its way gingerly up the track, which stretched into the heart of the amusement park. He stayed his beating chest and the pounding of his breath. Even tiny movements were an obstacle to his progress. Amazingly, the one making this pale-faced advance higher and higher was Soujyuro Suzuki. Far below, he saw that a horde of bread creatures had congregated by the roller coaster's platform. As they bustled this way and that, their numbers continued to increase by the minute, seemingly cheering on Soujyuro with raised arms as he made his ascent. Or rather, they jeered as if beckoning him to come down.
助かった。あれ、高いところは苦手なんだ。
Of course, neither did Soujyuro, but his current state was the lesser of two evils. The only thing that followed him now was the floating egg. After heaving a huge sigh, Soujyuro bent forward a bit and climbed the track that inclined toward the heavens. 150 feet now. If this were a skyscraper, he would be on the 16th floor. A strong gust of wind whipped through his hair. Humans had an instinctual fear of heights. In particular, a place like this, which called forth visions of falling to one's death, would cause a person's knees to tremble against their will. It was an instinct that forewarned death, urging its master to return to the safety of the ground. It was a reasonable reaction. Climbing the roller coaster tracks went beyond funny stories and into the realm of fantasy. The strong winds and change in air pressure were a hindrance. His instincts screamed at him to stop, causing his legs to go numb, his muscles to go limp, and his mind to race. Even if he had been tied to a lifeline, a mere 15 feet of climbing would still have caused his thoughts to freeze out of sheer terror. It would only get worse from here, exponentially so. Every foot forward increased the load on both his mind and his body by another degree.
よし、頂上まであと少し。
The burden on his mind notwithstanding, he carefully measured the toll on his body with every step. His legs, which had carried him running this far, threatened to buckle the moment he let down his guard. This fatigue was likely why Aoko had stressed that Sojuro's role was more dangerous than hers.
待てよ。逆を言うと、疲れてなければなんとかなると思ってたんだよな。
Soujyuro laughed as he stared at the floating egg. He reflected on the course of events that had led to this absurd situation. Not even 10 minutes ago, they had been engaged in conversation.
じゃあ次ね。正体が分かった以上、あとはどう壊すかを話し。
Soujyuro felt a shudder travel down his spine at Aoko's smug grin. In hindsight, Aoko had been more than happy at this point to make him do something absurd.
どう壊すかって、それなら。
Soujyuro wondered aloud. From what he had seen, Aoko had enough firepower to tear clean through the fence. He'd refrained from speculating about Flatsnark's true form because he'd felt there was nothing they could do about it even if they knew. But that had changed. For Aoko, the impossible was quite literally within her grasp.
そうでもないわ。私の目算だと、あと50メートル分、ギリギリで届かない。足りない分は努力と根性ってね。あなたはできるだけ高いところまで逃げて、頃合いを見て合図を出すから、そうしたらこれを空に放ってくれる？
つまり、青崎とは別行動をとって、あの怪物。
そういうこと。ほら、あのうねうね動き出してるコースターのレールとかよくない？
疑いたくはないんだが、本当はあの子とグルで俺を遠回しに殺そうとしてるんじゃないか。
あら、私に殺されるのならいいんでしょ？
人の出現を悪用するのは良くないと思う。
私だって鬼じゃないわ。ほら、こっち向いて。
Wait, I forgot to mute the mic for that. I forgot to mute the mic for that. But, yeah, I mean, I was just chewing on the apple, forgot that I didn't mute the mic. Well, at the very least, me eating an apple is not the most embarrassing thing that could have happened. Soujyuro hung his head. This was not sane. If he did as she said, he would die from exhaustion before Kitsy even had a chance to eat him.
おまじないかけてあげる。
It was the lightest of touches, close enough for their breath and skin to come in contact. He finished with a hushed voice. Zaki, he finished with a hushed voice. For one of them, this was a rather mundane magecraft. The other, it was a head-spinning, intimate ambush.
軽く、弱く、うまく、早く。チクタク、チクタク。急げや、急げ。
Words that could not be produced by normal larynx carrying a peculiar weight to them reverberated against his eardrums. If words were given colors, these would have been the color of her name. Blue. Sojuro's exhausted body and burning blood gently cooled.
飛ぶ、泳ぐ、駆け抜ける。チクタクチクタク、汽笛を鳴らせ。星はいつでも北の空。どこまでも、いつまでも。
In reality, it took but a few seconds. But sun contact had felt a little longer.
よし、暗示成功。成功したはず。ここまで手応えがあったの初めてだし。アリスの小言もたまには役に立つじゃない。
A very merry Aoko stood aside a very confused Soujyuro. After he asked what the heck had occurred, she responded.
簡単な暗示よ。一時的に恐怖心を消しておいたから、高いところに登っても平気なはず。あの手の作業で一番足を引っ張るのは同様でしょ。恐怖も何も感じなければ地上何メートルだろうと平均台とそう変わらないってわけ。
He seemed to get it. It actually all sounded like Greek to Soujyuro, but he accepted it as an explanation for her strange actions. He'd arrived at the summit of the track. From nearly 200 feet high, Soujyuro had a bird's eye view of the entire amusement park. He was able to spot Aoko's figure right away. In the plaza, not so far from here, she seemed to be occupied with something conspicuous. Her surroundings laid still. The breadmen were still trying to figure out how to reach Soujyuro by trial and error from the other roller coaster's entrance. They were over 300 feet away now. The strong winter gales quickly dried the sweat on his brow, but he was drenched underneath his shirt. This much sweat was worth at least a half-mile run, not to mention all the scares he had experienced throughout the night. He felt a wave of relief, but not at the thought of Aoko destroying the snark in this nightmarish park. He was simply happy that he could repay a bit of his debt from the House of Mirrors. A blue bullet rose from the plaza where Aoko was located. Soujyuro stood up atop the tracks, pulled out the pouch he had stowed in his pocket, and tossed it forward. Without any regard for his questionable footing, he gave it a mighty overrun pitch. The small pouch drew a parabolic curve in Aoko's direction, quickly becoming untied in midair. Inside the bag was a lock of her hair and a small stone weight. Aoko had said, but it was Sojuro's effort that had set the plan in motion. The tuft of hair remained airborne, drifting as if watching over its owner. Sojuro's job was done. He remained concerned about the egg hovering over him, but there was nothing he could do about it. Soujyuro breathed a sigh of relief and leaned forward to watch the rest of the plan unfold. But then, In the corner of his eye, he thought he spotted something familiar approaching Aoko. Is it the doll?
Route set. Direct. 1層、2層、予備に3層。魔力提供。体現に固定。循環よし、射角よし、術式安定、大まかよし。
A pattern began to carve itself into the brick street, casting of an unprecedented incantation with unprecedented range. Keeping the rising tension contained within her crest, the fledgling mage snapped her fingers.
決めた。ツアープラン、スターマイン。
She kneeled at the center of the formula and raised her head to the night sky. Not even a glimpse of the transmogrified fantasy land around her entered her vision now. Only one thing, one untouchable thing was reflected in her blue eyes.
実はずっと気になっていたことが。
This is how the conversation started a few minutes prior. Soujyuro began with a simple statement of fact. In truth, it really was the simplest of discrepancies. Any difference between the reality of an hour ago and the illusion of the present was both infinitesimal and infinite.
雲があったから勘違いしたんだろうけど。
It was hiding in plain sight. Too impossible to be real, too outlandish to be there. In this amusement park where every paradigm had shifted, something was brazenly flaunting its normalcy.
今夜は新月なんだ、青崎。
Wait. Oh! Okay.
思えば、初めっからその形だったものね、あんたは。
The distance from the Earth to the Moon was 238,900 miles. If it truly was identical to the actual moon, then this monster indeed lived up to its eerie reputation. At a distance that vast, there would have been no need to hide. It could flaunt its true form for all to see. But if it had to hide its true form, that meant it was vulnerable. The monster's camouflage implied that it's out within the reach of human hands.
こっちの最大射程はよくて600ってところだけど。
Stop mocking me! Just destroy the moon. At this point, it was time to give it all she had. Drawing on the energy surging throughout the park, she extended her firing arm. A blue firework launched into the air. Looking up at her hair dancing in the wind above, Aoko reached out her right hand as if to catch the night sky. A mage's own body made for the perfect catalyst. And for a female mage, the hair she had grown out over many years made for a particularly valuable and powerful source of fuel. To use it, all she had to do was apply her will. She locked the fingers on both her hands together and shouted.
三層展開全術式連結起動
She hurled forth a clear challenge to bind the moon to herself. The mist began to whirl about in the vortex. The monster high above bore its fangs at the side of a blue spell that appeared in midair.
見抜かれた
By the time Alice had noticed the change, the hostility between Aoko and the Snark was palpable.
そうなら青子の勝ちよすぐに戻りなさい確かに雨雲を消したのはヒントの上げすぎだけど
The fog continued to thicken with no sign of abating. Yeah, it's just straight up not listening to Alice at this point. The moon that floated in the night sky could not pardon such an insolent mage. As if the Lord of the Night would bow down to such impudence, there was no staying its wrath at a challenge so flagrant.
スナーク。
The Robin swooped in to give its report, but Alice waved it away. Her gaze was fixed on the transforming golden moon. Her calls of restraint did not reach it. This fairy tale monster was beholden to nobody, and would have no qualms unleashing its vast might upon its puny prey. The core of her magic bullet howled. Magic circuits within her body spun. Aoko fed the magical energy, scorching her nerves with imaginary flame. She was linked to the formula inscribed on the ground. The spell was read and executed the same as it always was, but its output was beyond reckoning. With this much firepower, even this mundane process wouldn't fight injury upon its caster. It was enough to burn up the nerves that were acting as the barrel. The imaginary heat had reached a terrifying temperature. Aoko trembled at this endless feeling, but would have to grin and bear it lest their efforts come to naught. Aoko could no longer move. When she had learned the Snark's true form from Soujyuro, she gave up on any superiority and movable turret offered, instead opting to become a stationary cannon. That was the only way she could reach it. It was impossible to hunt the Snark unless she anchored her crest at this location and angle. At the same time, this action revealed that she was out of options. Once the fuse was lit, she would have no choice but to fight to the bitter end. Aoko took a deep breath. This was the way she wanted it. Her preparations were complete. She would be able to deliver this maelstrom of magical energy directly to the moon, like a rocket payload. The third mid-air layer served as a cannon's muzzle and sight. It would fire the magical energy once it reached criticality, and it allowed Aoko to adjust the angle of fire. The moon became warped within her scope. As Aoko charged her magical energy, the ploy displayed its golden form as if to mock her. Come, worship the heavens, powerless scion of an innocent bloodline. For there was a point among the otherworldly sky, a mystical visage obfuscated by jade mists and azure clouds, called the greatest treasure known to the world of magecraft, rarity more valuable than an entire kingdom, crowned phantasm. Set apart from the first, the world's greatest fabrication. Her instincts screamed at her to delay no further. This fairy tale monster was the greatest of its kind, and it was about to expose its true form. Its open hostility made it clear that it was ready to counterattack. She had to shoot it down first. Magical energy was at 80%. The formula was operating normally. All that was left was to pull the trigger. But the calm voice inside her head asked if that was really okay. She had one shot at this, and there was no going back. It was a battle of precision with no room for miscalculations. Even a tenth of a second of hesitation would tip the scales. Was she ready for the pain? Was she ready to deal with the fallout if she missed? Could she really even take down the moon with such a tiny boulder in the first place? Her eyes, fixed upon the moon, were filled with determination. She knew that the moment she fired, the intense recoil would overwhelm her entire body. Still, she shouted. With every ounce of spirit she possessed, she fired her ultra-long-range projectile into the sky. The third layer embraced the magic bullet fired from the surface of the earth. The crest, an extension of Aoko's self, unleashed light to pierce the moon. However, an enormous blue canopy pulverized the beam. It returned the ether that 3,000 degree flame to nothing. As it came in contact with the bullet. The recoil of the gun of Grand Magecraft literally boiled her blood. Her body couldn't handle it. Her heart stopped. Her brain went numb from the pain and impact. Her nerves putrefied from end to end, but her magic crest revived them all by force. Even though her vision had gone white, she could still see it. Swallowing with blood in her mouth, Aoko looked up with a scowl. There it was, an enormous shield of ice and a sneering, deformed skull. There was no time to think or hesitate. Magical energy throughout the park began to gather. Aoko knelt. Across from the tyrannical face of the moon, she intuited that the ice had yet to fully form. Flat Snark still hadn't reached its full strength. Which was exactly why... By accelerating the spell, Aoko damaged her own body. The burden of linking the formula to the Snark caused intense pain. All she could do was grit her teeth and endure it. All because... Aoko had gotten a read on their relative strengths. Even if its volume of magical energy was identical to Snark's form, its mystic scale was in a different league. Aoko could charge her energy to her absolute limit, and that would barely make a dent in the ice wall. Meanwhile, there was nothing she could do to prevent her own annihilation if the Snark gathered as much energy as it could. She loaded her next shot. She issued orders to the floating third layer. Ignoring the toll on her body, she began to accelerate the first layer formula. The role of her right-hand single layer was to absorb and store surrounding magical energy. The thick fog that drifted through the park was an ancient ether spewed out by Flat Snark's own body, but Aoko could pour it into her formula. Aoko's body, which had integrated with the formula, took on an amount of magical energy that far surpassed its maximum capacity. It seethed in agony, or rather it trembled in delight. For a mage, magical energy was a propellant to reach the realm of mystics. The expansion of eternal time, the liquefaction of the self, the release from the physical. They were all what one might call a near-death experience. On the precipice of what lay beyond, Aoko stood firm. It faced reality. So, reality had come to break her will. The gap between them was plain to any observer. The gun barrel, named Aoko Ozaki, had not a chance to chip away at that lump of ice. She accelerated the spell further. The skull grinned. That ice was no shield. It was a hammer to crush mages who did not know their place. The moon laughed as it prepared to crush not just Aoko, but the boy atop the roller coaster, as well as the park in its entirety. Her circuits were on the verge of going critical. Her body had been charged with the scorching power supply from her fingertips to her eyeballs. She would see the bullet fired. She would arrange the Magecraft formula as quickly as her nerve's transmission speed would allow. A single attack was not enough. There was no way to shoot it from this flank, which meant there was only one solution. The third layer began to transform. It switched from direct to alternating current. The spell's supposed strong point was the ability to adjust its trajectory mid-flight, but right now all she wanted was numbers. Okay, so... Wait, is she trying to... I'm guessing that Aoko's going to try to... Like, part of it overwhelm through sheer numbers, but also maybe see if the sheer density could, I don't know. blue sun shined down upon the amusement park. Beams of light and maximum output streaked forth to pierce the golden moon. Holding down the trigger, she continued to fire, taking in energy in ad infinitum. Blue flames shot forth at critical level. The ice would neither melt nor mar. No amount of sheer heat could make a dent in something formed from such a colossal amount of magical energy. The toll on her circuit sent them berserk, and blood began to run free. The battle had become a tussle over the magical energy that filled the park. From the very beginning, this had been the Snark's home turf. Snark had control over at least 80% of the space, while Aoko had 20 at best. Castle of Ice descended, as if to call the match. All she could do was delay the inevitable. She knew that she had been backed into a wall right now. The only thing she could do was to keep firing. Then again, perhaps not. There was another option. If she converted all her magical energy into a defense, there was a tiny chance, no, not tiny, a great possibility, in fact, that she could save just her. Clinging to that broken hope, Aoko continued to rotate her circuits. Time seemed to stop at the magical energy overdose. A second of intense pain lasted an eternity. Then, amidst everything, something approached one step at a time. Something from among the park's shadows. Something. She felt goosebumps from head to toe. Wait, that's the thing she saw in the House of Mirrors. The issue was no longer the ice overhead. In the midst of the stillness, the Red Death grew closer, step by ominous step. Her circuits and her mind began to rupture out of terror. The composition of her formula and soul began to rip apart. There it was, just behind her. Its footsteps came to a halt. It reached around and cupped her face in its blood-stained hands. She wanted to scream out with all her might. This is it. Nothing matters. I couldn't care less. Run or don't run, it doesn't matter. Quit hiding and reveal yourself. Use whatever you can and show no mercy. That was it. She had one final card to play. Once a miracle had been gifted to her, almost a miracle had been gifted to her, almost as a joke. It made the ice look like child's play. That was what the Red Death had come to kill. Using it would spell ruin. Not using it would mean death by ice. Then why hesitate? There were no conditions on its use. There was no price to pay for its power. She simply would cease to be herself. That was all. Humans love to exist in areas of gray. Dozens of electrical impulses disconnect in the brain every minute. Nothing lasts forever, not even oneself. It was not anything particularly worthy of disdain. It was not even anything remarkably worthy of being called taboo. What escaped her lips now was rage. Bewilderment from the red silhouette. The girl let out an inaudible scream. Could true magic truly be her savior? What an opportunistic load bull. After all, to begin with, indeed, Aoko was still in the dark when it came to that magic, whatever it was. She woke from her momentary hallucination. The very illusion her breaking soul had shown her. Whining had the opposite effect on her. Her pride was now ablaze. Soujyuro was right. Her opponent had put her in check, but she had done the same to it. It was clear why she was losing, so now all she needed was a counter plan, well within her abilities. No matter the odds, she was not one to give up without giving it one last shot. Her numbed fingers clenched into a tight fist. She was betting against the house, an unreasonable gamble that should have made her question her sanity. If her first step was off by an inch, her body would be instantly vaporized. But she knew a boy who never fled. She knew of a steadfast courage that could shine its light, no matter how small, through any desperate situation. Yes, there was more than just herself to be concerned about. If that ice fell, it would mean the destruction of the park in its entirety. Everything he had achieved, everything he had risked and dared and happily put his life on the line for, would all be for naught. Determination and confidence surged through her like electricity. She was in no mood to be crushed by a giant sheet of ice. If she was going to lose, she'd rather do so as the grandest firework possible. Aoko was a sore loser. At this point, she would rather burn herself to cinders than let it decide her end. She grunted in pain. Energy raged through her body. Circuits were on the verge of disintegration. Inscribed upon her body, her magic crest was magecraft in physical form. It did not, however, stop with simply skin and flesh. It burned to the very marrow of her bones. A playful smile graced her lips. Her sense of reason had been turned upside down by the pain. That was only natural. She had to praise her own body for holding out so long while pushed beyond its limits. Skullface noticed the abnormality. It finally recognized the challenge for dominance over this space. It laughed at the conceited face. Never did it expect a magician to challenge Never did it expect the magician to challenge the great flat snark, lord of vessels over a millennium and in such an age of decline. She tried to catch her breath. She braced herself for the coming pain. She was going to smash that ice to pieces. Both had access to the same amount of magical energy. One of them was greatly outmatched, but... Oh wait, is she going to... Okay, so since it's a beam, is she going to narrow the barrel to get more force out of it? The feedback would go beyond anything she had experienced to date. Quite simply, her decision went beyond recklessness. She expanded both formulas to maximum size. The first layer would transform into a giant vortex, swallowing up mist. The second layer would process it from one end and pump it into her barrel. Oh wait, okay, so pumping up, so increasing the amount going in and basically doing an incredibly risky gambit in order to force more energy through. Primeval power answered the spellcaster's conviction. It formed the pattern of a whirling serpent. Voiceless magical power flew a banner of revolution. Now, look upon the earth, O venerable one. See now this pioneer, this first among trailblazers. She embodies a species that knows no fear, that renders not all manner of mystic and tradition. That renders not all manner of mystic and tradition.
貸し借りはここまでよ。嘘つきブーちゃん。お望み通り、年をつけて返してあげる。
The hampered bullet of light melted through the castle of ice. The barrel held fast. Sorry about that. Someone outside was being loud. Alright. Her controlled magical energy was divine. 100,000 miles of veins, equal to 2.5 times the circumference of the Earth, hungrily drank in the magical energy. Subsequent magical strike hurtled straight up at the moon. Death rose from the moon's surface. A cry of indignant terror echoed through the abandoned park. Reality was burned into the eyes of this creature of fantasy. To Aoko, its vain struggle was the taste of victory. Victory despite her absolute reckless use of magical energy. The energy scales had been tipped to her at their breaking point, but nevertheless in her favor. Okay. Whew. Shatter, 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 shatter. Skyscraper scattered into atomized dust. The island's unattainability extolled had swallowed whole the despair of its many challengers. Long it had proudly eluded mankind's intellect. And now, an azure mist moaned its demise. In the sky, the icy canopy crumbled. The snark-hunting bullet jumped over the moon. Its throes of death sounded like the roaring sea reverberating across this fairy tale land. The battle was over. The thick fog dissipated and the shattered ice melted away before it hit the ground. A lethal bullet unseated the Night King from his throne, affording him no time to grieve his loss. The oil of the moon, the untouched, flat snark. The dreamscape that had begun with its resurrection ended with its demise, drawing a close to the nightmare. Just straight up risking her own, straight up nearly getting herself killed to pump. It kind of went overboard. Flat on her back, Aoko looked up at the night sky. She lay there perfectly still, not able to move a single finger. When she tried, her whole body screamed out in agony. She was completely empty of magical energy, and her magic crest had come to a halt. She estimated that it would likely require a whole day to recover all her bodily functions. Sadly, all she could really do in that moment was take a breath. At least her chest was swelling with pride. She'd gone toe-to-toe with a fairy tale monster and had emerged victorious. The battlefield conditions had favored her, it was true, but there was no denying that Aoko had come a long way in the last 6 months.
それはそれとしてアリスには謝っとかないと。プロイって壊したらそれっきりだものね。
Flat Snark would never again return to this world. It was an insanely rare item, so invaluable that it would have been impossible to price it for auction at the Association in London. Aoko had sent Alice's priceless treasure to oblivion. Needless to say, things had gotten more than a little out of hand.
まあ
They had both agreed to the fight, so Alice probably would not complain. Even if she was furious, she would never be so undignified as to show it. The second Aoko relaxed, her fatigue finally caught up with her. She did everything in her power to fight off the overwhelming drowsiness. Aside from a few minor internal injuries, her body was miraculously unscathed. She felt like she could probably stand up and dust herself off after a bit of rest. Yeah, it pretty much is a miracle that she's still that her entire nervous system didn't get burnt out. The golden moon continued to burn in the night sky. Aoko's bleary eyes went wide in astonishment. She was still unable to lift a finger. She sighed in resignation. Aoko accepted that her final stand left her with only 10 seconds before she burned to ash too. Elsewhere, just a short moment prior, buffeted by strong winds atop the roller coaster, Soujyuro gravely peered down at the ground. All he could muster was a single murmur. You could see Aoko on top of some drawing on the ground, and in the distance, there was something familiar in the direction of the ruined House of Mirrors. Soujyuro's job, to throw Aoko's hair from a great height, was complete. All out of the most impressive of tasks, it was absolutely a matter of life or death. Huh? Oh, sorry, my phone vibrated. And to top it all off, just thinking about how he was going to get back down to the ground was making him dizzy. He had experienced more than enough trouble for one day.
Yeah.
He was flustered as he stood atop the swaying bridge. A skull suddenly appeared in the sky above. On the ground, he could see a circling blue light with Aoko Ozaki in the middle of it. And one more thing. From an angle that only Soujyuro could see, a shadow stalked Aoko while she challenged the moon. What the? It's still alive? It was shaped like a person, missing the lower half of its body. The disembodied torso slowly crawled its way toward Aoko. They're still over 600 feet apart. Unfortunately for Aoko, she completely failed to notice it approaching from behind. He was sure of what it was now. There was only one thing in the park that would chase Aoko. And not notice him. His mind ran in circles. It was a perfectly reasonable reaction. Any grip on reality he might have had was long lost when Aoko started firing beams in the light of the monstrous moon. Aoko's merciless fire buffeted the roller coaster like a storm. Just standing on it was almost enough for him to be thrown off and killed. At any rate, Soujyuro couldn't fathom the situation. Should he get back to the entrance of the roller coaster and warn Aoko about the incoming threat? No, there was no way he would make it in time, and to make matters worse, there was a horde of Brett down there, waiting for him. It may very well have been the case that Aoko was already aware of the puppet and would take it out as soon as it got closer. If she was, Soujyuro was sure he would only be in the way. But it did not seem like there was anything he could do to help, and beyond that, Aoko was not the one in danger. He was in quite a predicament himself. He can't go home again. The road home was never as safe as one thought. It It was as true here as it had been in the mountains. The path he was on was no exception. As risky as the ascent had been, it was even more dangerous to go back down. This was no time to worry about others. His shaking legs reminded him that only 200 feet separated him from death. His head was pounding. This was reckless and stupid. Having been raised in the mountains, he was more sensitive to danger than anyone raised in the city, and just thinking about what he was about to do made his throat seize up. There was only one thing he could say for sure. With a sobbing shout, Soujyuro started making his way down the 200-foot frame of the roller coaster. His race toward death accelerated. He never meant to speed up, but the downward slope propelled him forward. It was too late for regrets. Now that he was running, he had no choice but to go even faster. And time was not on his side. He would never make it in time if he took the long way down, never mind the breadmen crowding the exit of the roller coaster. With the exits blocked, the outcome would be the same whether he went slowly or quickly. There was no reason to rush to his death as desperately as he did. So what if it was futile? Soujyuro cleared the doubts from his mind. He turned his attention to what he could do, keep his footing, and try to arrive at the bottom as quickly as he could. He had no idea what impulses were driving his stiff limbs. He was just focused on the moment, pushing past the fear and the cold logic. At his core, he was the kind of person to deal with problems head on. There would be time to think about the consequences later. But hesitation was not his only obstacle. Worst possible hindrance appeared at a time when not focusing on the track would mean certain death. Soujyuro sensed something wrong with the egg he had been so studiously observing out of one eye. Something had changed. And at the very moment he realized it, Soujyuro stumbled, then instinctively caught himself. It was a miracle he had not fallen. Descending a roller coaster on foot was an act of suicide. The egg stayed right by his side, so close it was likely it would collide with him. Though he was trying not to look at it, he could not help but feel uneasy that the door-like decoration on its center was gradually opening. He cursed his rotten situation, and yet he refused to slow down. He ran even faster, glaring at the egg on his side. Soujyuro was baffled to find that he was smiling. Perhaps it had something to do with Aoko's charm. Soujyuro could not tell one way or the other. He could still feel Aoko's fingers on his skin. The trust and expectation she had placed in him was etched into his heart. What spurred him on was something entirely different. This all stemmed from a much deeper problem. It was something inside him that he could not understand at the time, but would eventually come to terms with one day. He carefully judged the distance as he ran down the track of death. But the distance between what? That went without saying. It was the distance between him and the one thing that could save his life. He told himself he was going to do it over and over like a mantra. Soujyuro could not believe himself. What he was about to do was incredibly stupid. But what is stupid when smart is not an option? He's going to jump on the egg. He's going to jump on the egg. Amidst it all, he laughed at how pointless such self-reflection was now. Temporary confusion, psychological thrill ride, both had laid his soul bare. What really mattered in life? The answer to that question was simple. His primitive values did not crave success or reward. All he wanted was to live the way he wanted. It wasn't an obligation to the people around him. The desire to live his way was his and his alone. If the egg had been equipped with a vocal function, he would have gasped in shock at what happened next. The boy who had only tried to escape up until this point suddenly shifted his weight. He pointed his feet downward instead of inward. On the edge of one rail, he crouched ever so slightly to maintain momentum and gazed at the floating egg. He soared through the night sky. It was a flight that lasted a mere 1.5 seconds. A cordless bungee jump from 100 feet above the ground. Its destination? The only thing that would stop his fall. The giant flying egg. He shrieked, this time out of elation as he desperately clung to the egg's surface. Just earlier, the cold-blooded witch had told him that without fear, the top of the building would feel no different than a balance beam. This from the same witch that would have been left speechless had she witnessed the spectacle. It was one thing to be fearless, and another to be reckless. What the boy did would give her a headache in the day. What the boy did next would give her a headache in the days to come. Clinging to the egg, he shifted his gaze away from it and felt the rapid descent. Soujyuro, focusing his half-shut eyes on the ground, leaped off the egg once they were a few feet from the ground and turned back to it, careful to re-establish eye contact. Something so unbelievable, though, to Soujyuro, the elevator at the department store, and the mysterious floating egg were both just moving objects, virtually indistinguishable from one another. Oh wait. Yeah, something so unbelievable, though Soujyuro... Okay, yeah. It's always a shame. Okay. They landed near the plaza. A shortcut that almost cost him his life had paid off. Soujyuro took off running the second his feet touched the ground. Yeah, sometimes... just taking an insane risk, but... Well, if that's the only way out of a situation... Shouldn't, I guess. Puppet after Aoko was the only thing on his mind. He paid no mind to the moonlight in the sky. Nor to the egg, which was furious about being used and seconds away from self-destructing and blasting fragments all over the place. Aoko's dumbfounded expression spurred Soujyuro on. The curse was complete. The empty egg began to sing its warning to let them know there was no escape. Shrapnel from the egg exploded through the air. The ode to Queen Alice that Alice had engraved into Dumpty quickly robbed him of his senses. He snapped back to the task at hand, Red Aoko still lying on the ground. His legs moved as if they had a mind of their own, though he couldn't have stopped them anyway since he could no longer feel them. Scrambled murder case. Piles of rubble became flowers of light blooming from the earth. A final curtain drew close, and the defeated left the battleground. Had Alice gone, she seen it happen, she would have been beside herself. The two had escaped by a hair's breadth. The only person in a position to witness that rare mutual destruction was the girl who had been saved from it. The boy who had never stopped running paid it no mind. The safety of the girl in his arms meant infinitely more to him than the miraculous way in which he saved her. This one chapter alone is taking up almost the entire night's stream. The moon did not wait for dawn to set. The ornamental texture of the fairy tale kingdom faded away. All the illusions returned to the way they were before, from the ostentatious chords reverberating through the streets to the puppets welcoming their guests. Peace and quiet reigned once more, over a forgotten kingdom never to be awakened again. Out flickered the embers of a late-night dream. even the electric lamps that illuminated the park. Together they watched it disappear. Soujyuro lay on the ground, desperately grasping for air like a fish out of water. The curse of the exploding head had numbed his pain, and he was understandably exhausted after all he had experienced. It looked like he could be blown away by the lightest breezes. Meanwhile, Aoko was also exhausted, though she was in better shape. Focused on taking deep, even breaths, she was already working to recover her strength. She addressed Soujyuro indifferently as her gaze remained on the amusement park. The abruptness of it was a bit theatrical in nature. She wanted to look at him as she spoke, but her pride was simply too great. The moment she had accepted death had seemed like an eternity. She was beside herself in shock at how indifferent she had been as the shards rained down from the moon. But a reassuring voice had snapped her back into reality. Why did he do it? What was he thinking? What moronic things had he done to pull it off? She had no answers for these questions, lying on the ground as she was. All she knew was that he had more than made up for his failure in the House of Mirrors, and then some, in those fateful final moments. She addressed him, hoping to find answers, but found herself unable to probe any further. To dig any deeper would feel like defeat, which is why it was so unlike her to ask him in the first place. Lucky for her, Soujyuro had neither the capacity nor sensitivity to understand how egocentric she was being. He stuttered between labored breaths. It was taking him so much effort just to breathe that he could not address her properly. She watched him out of the corner of her eye. Thinking back on it, the boy had performed the same role each time. Each and every time he did what he could in spite of his fecklessness. He was far more admirable than her nearly suicidal tactics, even as she did defeat her opponent. He did not even recognize how extraordinary his last act of courage was. At the very least, he had the courage to keep trying whatever he could. A spectator might have viewed him as a supporting actor. His actions were not exactly memorable. But the lead actress he supported did not see it that way. Such inspired actions were wasted in a supporting role. This guy really pulled off the impossible. It was so amazing that she wanted to shout it as loud as she possibly could for all the world to hear. All Aoko could do was sigh. How could she not? Even she was forced to admit that the way he snatched her from the jaws of death was dashing. Truth be told, he was a lunatic for doing what he did. She steadied her breathing and composed herself. While she was in bad shape, she still had her pride as a mage to consider. That was why she felt the need to maintain an air of dignity. 見逃すのは今日だけって話だったけど、あれ、なしでいいわ。とりあえず、命は助けてあげるから。She hastily extended her right hand. It was either to shake his or to help him up. However, Soujyuro did not take her hand, but instead stood up on his own. This night, despite the sheer insanity that he had just experienced, his face had not once looked as incredulous as it did now. She stammered, worried that she had deeply embarrassed herself. Soujyuro's gaze was fixed upon Aoko. The problem had dawned on Aoko. Though she normally hated being stared at, this time she did not mind. Rather, she was enjoying the warmth in his eyes and felt like it was something she could almost come to appreciate. The conversation came rushing back. It was a memory better left forgotten. misunderstanding. A very big misunderstanding from Tomimoto. Pushing Tomimoto's words out of her mind, Aoko turned to Soujyuro. Puzzled, Soujyuro tilted his head.
さっき嫌いだって言われたけど
He responded matter-of-factly to her sudden declaration. She certainly had pointed that out into his face, no less, in a mere figure of speech that he was not meant to take literally, but now was not the time to belabor the point.
そうじゃなくて
Yet, belabor she did anyway. Aoko blushed slightly, realizing how inane she was being. She wondered how... She wondered how she ended up in this position. And yet, she knew that she had to get this off her chest. All that was left was to politely wait for his response. I can't date you. Such heartbreakingly painful words were too much for the simple boy to hear. His shoulders slumped, as if the world was coming to an end. Or so Aoko had imagined. On the contrary, Soujyuro was staring.
俺があ
Soujyuro murmured the words as if they were a magic spell. She shot right back with the affirmative. After a moment of deep contemplation, the boy turned to the expectant girl and said,
なんで
He had to be joking, but he was not. He was completely serious. So he liked her, but he didn't like her. Of course, the vice president jumped to conclusions. This boy had no interest in romance. He probably didn't even know what that was. She was incredibly embarrassed by how confused Soujyuro still appeared to be. Her rosy complexion spread throughout her entire body.
もう一度聞くけどなんで
Hey, just save your life. You don't have to punch him. This is partly why I've stopped liking. This is part of the reason why I don't really like the Tsundere gimmick. Still, don't take it out on him. He just saved your life. Just like that. She had lost her cool and given into an unjustifiable. Or at the very least, the story's treating it as unjustifiable. It was time to seal off the area and destroy all evidence. Aoko's embarrassment devolved into sheer panic, and her grudge against Tomimoto suddenly manifested as criminal assault. She lashed out with a punch that could have taken down a bird mid-flight. More specifically, it was a brutal right hook. Aoko blinked. Her blow had connected with something solid, snapping her out of her reverie. Her temper had lashed out at the completely defenseless Soujyuro. It had been a splendid blow with all her weight behind it, knocking him out cold. Soujyuro groaned, crumbling to the ground. Yeah, her punch finished the job that the curse had started. If not for the discomfort on his face, he appeared almost to be sleeping. Aoko convinced herself that he was napping, not concussed. The tension in her under shoulders eased away as she looked down at Soujyuro. The ton had gone in her way over the course of the day, but the day was saved for now. Nobody left to butt heads. She felt exhaustion finally overtake her. Her fatigue was enough to make her complain out loud. When she thought about it, she realized that this was the first time she had used up all of her magical energy, and the first time she participated in a battle of this scale without any prior preparation. Though in truth, she felt somewhat proud as she whispered those words. Normally, it was something that she would beat herself up over, but instead she simply shrugged her shoulders with a bitter smile. After all, it was thanks to the person sleeping by her side. As if the night had swallowed her voice before it reached him, she received no response. Confident, she continued in an even quieter voice. Of course, there was no response from Soujyuro, and she was not expecting one. Saying it for the record was enough. Aoko watched Soujyuro sleep for a while, then pulled something out of her pocket. It was a palm-sized glass bottle her roommate had given her, which she opened with a pop. Leaving behind words colder than a winter chill at night, she called out his name. She barely sensed the bottle moving. As the silhouette of the fallen boy appeared to blur, she got the feeling that the weight of the bottle had increased slightly. What appeared to be a human form could clearly be seen inside the glass. Aoko and Jesus' tools were mystics that confounded even the most knowledgeable of mages. As soon as Aoko tried to analyze them with logic and reason, she was already out of her depth. Knowing this all too well, Aoko closed the bottle and watched the boy disappear as if by some magical trick. She muttered as she looked into the magical bottle. Its weight had not changed significantly, and she had no idea how it worked, but the one thing its light weight was almost unnerving, closer to empty air than a human being. It was about as heavy as one would expect if they bottled summer breeze. Though that did fit her image of Soujyuro perfectly. She muttered to no one in particular as she recalled the past. Aoko wore a bittersweet smile. Her usual moodiness was gone. It was a dangerous world out there. It was good to have someone to keep her on her toes. With a wry chuckle, she flicked the magic bottle with her finger and set off walking. What's she going to do with that bottle? I assume she's just going to be... I assume that she's just going to, like, take it back to his apartment. She could hear a bell in the distance signaling the end of the play. An ephemeral dream gave way to reality. In the grand scheme of things, it had been but an instant. As the actors exited stage left, the last of the lights silently flickered out. And so, the long-dead amusement park played its final note, or its final role, as a memory for a boy and a girl. Oh my good lord! That was 3 hours. I'm looking at it right now. That was like around 3 hours on the dot. Just this one chapter was 3 hours on the dot. I mean, I'm glad I had that apple halfway through because I'd be even more starving. I'd be absolutely starving right now if I didn't. Oh my God. Okay, I gotta say, that was really cool. Like that was the art was cool. The art of Aoko's attack was cool. The whole situation, and I mean, okay, yeah, the dude definitely didn't deserve to get punched for that. Though I at least appreciate that the story is actually portraying Aoko as being in the wrong for that. Like, I know plenty of other games, anime, manga, that sort, or not even just Japanese stuff, but also American or Western stuff would just kind of gloss over the fact that she just straight up, decked him. At least it pointed out that she was objectively that is one thing I do appreciate about this game so far, that whenever Aoko actually does something unreasonable or selfish, it actually, doesn't portray her as being in the right for it. But it does seem like she's getting character development. She's definitely, aside from the criminal assault, Aoko actually appears to be defrosting a bit. And also Aoko Tomimoto is even higher on Aoko, is even lower in Aoko's esteem now for immediately assuming that, or for feeding her bad information. But I wonder what she's going to do to Soujyuro. I presume that she's just going to take him back to her house first, sleep, and then take him back to his apartment. Because that just seems like the most reasonable course of action, given that I don't think she could physically go back to his apartment and still make it back to her, or to the mansion. Wait, I'm only now just reading the intermission like a dog. That I'm curious as to what that entails. My voice, my throat feels a little hoarse. Yeah, I think my voice is a little hoarse. But yeah, no, this is really like Aoko. Like Aoko's still very mean, but honestly, she's very. I will say she is very. The characters so far, even if they're even if they're odd, I feel like they're actually, or at least like we haven't really seen enough of Alice to. Oh wait, I feel Alice hasn't been given as much focus even during this whole fight, but honestly, with I'm actually kind of liking how Alco's development is going because it's not too it's not like she instantly becomes a nicer, more mature person, but it is clear that she's actually growing up and becoming less of a jerk. But yeah, I'm really enjoying this so far. But yeah, I don't know if I can keep reading for another few hours because I have no clue how long the next I have no clue how long the next few chapters are going to be, and this if this was like 3 hours long. Okay, yeah. So I think we're gonna cool things off. I think we're going to end things here tonight. Um, tomorrow we've got a. Tomorrow we've got a. I've got a Darkest Dungeon stream at 12 or 12 EST. Um, and I don't know if I'll stream for too long tomorrow because there are a few things I need to do in the afternoon. I need to work out. I need to prepare for a game I've run for some friends. I gotta get dinner, do some work. I mean, I'm not canceling the stream because I've already put it on the old schedule. But yeah, uh, this game is really. I'm actually really enjoying this, and I'm really liking seeing the change in the way Aoko acts. But yeah, let's save for the night because I don't want to have to skip through all of that tomorrow or for the next stream in case I forget. Let's just double check. Okay, yeah. But yeah, that is going to be it for tonight. Thanks everyone for watching and supporting my content. And one thing I did notice is that I don't know why. I mean, I'm not complaining about I won't complain about it, but I'm still a little confused. So far, I've been checking I checked some of the analytics the other day, and I don't know why, but um, actually, since we're off, since we're off, since we're off, or since we're about to end for the night, I guess I'll just switch over to. There we go. Yeah, I'm switching onto this. Yeah, I don't know why, but it seems like the first the first episode of this series has actually been doing pretty well. I don't know why. Maybe it has something to do with the company that makes this game. I know they have like a popular. I know they have like a popular mobile game. Admittedly, I have played that. Fake Grand Order, I think. Um, but maybe that has something to do with it. I don't know. But well, it could also be because I think people were really waiting for this game to get an actual official English release. So maybe that. I don't know. I don't know, but it is nice. It is nice to see that people appear to be enjoying enjoying the content. But yeah, we're going to be having I'm going to be having a Darkest Dungeon stream at tomorrow noon, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And again, not going to be very long. I've got plenty of stuff to do tomorrow morning and afternoon. So yeah. And after tomorrow's stream, I'll upload the next schedule. I think it's going to be pretty similar to how things were this week. Maybe I'll just switch the schedule around, make the Witch on the Holy Night streams Monday instead of Fridays. Actually, wait, no, I have stuff on Monday nights. Okay, which Wednesday? Which Wednesday? That's a snappy attention grabbing. That's a snappy attention grabbing thing. Okay. But yeah, that's it for tonight. Again, thank you all so much for supporting my content and watching. And I will see you tomorrow. Take care.